We made this.
Welcome everyone to a podcast devoted to the sounds of cinema and discussion about them between the notes, which is where we come in. I'm one of your hosts, Tony Black.
And I'm the other host, Sean Wilson. Hey everyone.
And in our first episode of the new rebooted second incarnation of Between the Notes, we will be presenting music from and discussing the work of Alan Silvestri, Rob Simonsen, West Dylan Thordson and more. Plus, we'll begin a two-part countdown of our best scores of 2018. But let's kick things off, however, with a piece of music from Alan Silvestri's score to Robert Zemeckis' Welcome to Marwen. So that was the title track from Welcome to Marwen by Alan Silvestri, which sees another collaboration with Robert Zemeckis going all the way back to at least 1985's legendary Back to the Future. So they've been working together for a long time. And we will come and discuss those guys in a little bit and talk a little bit about Welcome to Marwen. But first, given we're back, and it's great to be back, Sean. Like anyone who's listening to this, who listened to us back 2-3 years ago, must be thinking, where the hell have these guys been?
Yeah, I've been on sabbatical. You've had certain priorities, like getting married. So,
I've got my priorities all wrong, clearly.
Yeah. No, it's fantastic to be back doing this again and just hearing that roll call of fantastic composers that you were talking about at the start there, like Alan Silvestri and Rob Simonsen. It's a real thrill to be doing this again.
Simonsen, okay, is that how you say it?
I'm not sure, to be honest.
Because I remember historically, you always knew how to pronounce the composers. Like for years, I think I was saying Alexander Desplat.
But
it's Alexandre Desplat.
Yeah, he's called Desplat in the end credits of Moonrise Kingdom, though, because the kid calls him Desplat. So that's weird. Unless it's Simonsen. Like Rob Simonsen. Should we go with Simonsen because it sounds more logical?
Yeah, let's go with the agree on one of them. So we'll go with Simonsen for now. And if anyone wants to correct us, and I'm sure you will, let us know. We thought we'd start with some news because one of the big things to come out of the film music world this week, as we record, which is on the 10th of February. Yes, the 10th. I don't even know what day it is. That's a bit worrying. Is the fact that We know that Steven Spielberg is doing a remake of West Side Story, the classic, originally 1960s, I think 1962 musical. But everyone was assuming he would probably get one of his usual collaborators in, usually John Williams. But no, he's actually gone for David Newman to conduct, arrange, and underscore the West Side Story remake. Is this a surprise, Sean? Would you have expected John Williams or somebody else?
Yeah, well, I might have expected John Williams, but of course, got to bear in mind that John Williams is getting on a bit now, and he's also very busy scoring his final Star Wars film, Episode 9. So I imagine it was a combination of those two things that probably meant that John Williams was unavailable. But great to see David Newman getting a prestigious project, because David Newman scores a lot of comedies, although I suppose a lot of people hold his score for Matilda back in 1996 in very fond regards. It shows that Spielberg is increasingly diversifying his roster of composers, because he worked with Thomas Newman on Bridge of Spies and then Alan Silvestri on Ready Player One. Yeah, I think that's great. Very interested to know what David Newman's going to do with the Stephen Sondheim original, and indeed what Spielberg's going to do. I mean, the prospect of Spielberg doing West Side Story is very exciting.
I'll be honest, I'm not massively familiar with the original. I think I've seen it when I was young, but it's one I need to rewatch as we get close to the remake. So, but I am excited for it. I think it's going to be really interesting. I think it's going to be potentially great. And David Newman is almost like the lesser known Newman, isn't he? I mean, Thomas Newman is the one who everyone it leaps to mind about. So it is good to see him getting this kind of gig, really.
Yeah, he's a really, really talented composer. He works a lot with Danny DeVito, and again, I think he works on a lot of movies, quite low rent comedies that don't deserve his talents necessarily. So the idea of working with somebody like Spielberg, who prioritises music and understands scores and soundtracks, is really thrilling. Yeah, really looking forward to that. Looking forward to seeing what they're going to come up with.
Absolutely. And speaking of John Williams and getting on, the great man is 87 this week as well. So he is, and as you say, he's getting ready to score his last Star Wars film, Episode 9, and he's not been that well of late though, because last year, and I imagine, I think you went to this. It was there was the John Williams orchestrated concert at the Royal Albert Hall, and sadly he couldn't end up going. But did you still? I was supposed to be going, but then I somebody else went in my stead. Did you go to that one?
I did, and it was spectacular, despite the fact that he wasn't there. Apparently he was listening from his hospital bed, bless him, but his absence kind of charged the room with more power, actually, knowing that the orchestra put in double the effort given that he wasn't there, and it was a really, really powerful experience, and it's extraordinary how one man's artistry can bring together that many different people, different generations, different age groups. Yeah, it was a very, very powerful experience.
I was really looking forward to it, but yeah, his health hasn't been 100% sharp, so let's hope he's on form, and that as he enters his serious twilight years, that he still can contribute every now and then and do the odd thing, because obviously everyone's excited to see him sort of round off the 9th Star Wars film. You hope, it'd be nice for us to get one a year from him now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think that's the best we can hope for now, given that, as you say, he's entered his 87th year. I mean, the fact that he is still scoring Star Wars at that age that's quite incredible. And yeah, I think he's going to bow out of the series in style.
Yeah, I think I agree. Yeah, so that's going to be exciting. So we won't be the first people to say this, but happy birthday, John Williams.
Yeah, happy birthday, John.
And we can't wait for Star Wars, both to listen to and watch, really. Yeah, so let's swerve back onto Welcome to Marwen then, because this first episode of Between the Notes is sort of going to be covering January's sort of film score releases, because, we're releasing this mid-February. There's a lot been out already. There's some really good music out there, but we thought it might be nice to sort of, as we look back at the scores of 2018, but we sort of try and cover a little bit of what's come out over the last month or so. So Welcome to Marwen is, of course, the new film by Robert Zemeckis, starring Steve Carell, and it's been a little bit of a misfire, I think. It was a strange story based on a documentary called Marwen Cole about a man with certain mental health problems who sort of creates this sort of fantasy world, and it's sort of filmed in this photo sort of realistic style, and it did not do well at the box office or critically. So it's been a bit of a mixed bag. In terms of the score, though, I mean, we're both big fans of Alan Silvestri, particularly you, Sean. But does Welcome to Marwen match up both to his previous work and his collaborations with Robert Zemeckis?
Yeah, I think it does. I mean, Alan Silvestri can be a composer who's hard to get a bead on because he's so chameleonic and so versatile, and even in his collaborations with Robert Zemeckis, those scores encompass so many different styles and narratives and approaches. I mean, going right the way back to 1984 with Romancing the Stone, and then the defining trilogy like Back to the Future, and then you think of also things like Death Becomes Her, Forrest Gump, Contact, Castaway. I mean, all of those scores are very, very different. They sort of range from rip-roaring exuberance to quiet, contemplative introspection, and I think I really like the Welcome to Marwen score. Yeah, you're right. The film is a disaster, and actually the score, which I really, really enjoyed, does sort of it indicates the eccentricity at the heart of the movie, which is that the score basically sounds like a cross between Silvestri's very own Forrest Gump and Captain America. So you've got this lovely sort of lyricism mixed in with this militaristic theme, which sums up the battle that's going on within the head of the Steve Carell character. And I think Silvestri manages the two things very, very well in the music. I haven't actually seen the film. The film was a flop. I think it disappeared from UK cinemas pretty quickly in the wake of Christmas. But I think the music deserves to live on. I think Silvestri walks a very, very difficult line between summing up these disparate threads of what is a kind of like willfully eccentric story, albeit one that's based on a true story and it's based on a documentary. But I think probably one of the better Silvestri Zemeckis collaborations lately, because you could think things like Allied, which I wasn't that fond of, that was just a bit somber and a bit dull. I think this gets them back on top form.
Yeah, it feels like a score that potentially could be remembered more fondly than the movie. I haven't seen the movie either. I've only really heard bad things about it, to be honest. But I think that it's one of those things where it's one of those collaborations that has produced in the past, such rich fruit that, as you said, I didn't particularly love Allied either. I liked the score a little bit more than I did the movie. Zemeckis hasn't been on a good run of late as a director. I wasn't a big fan of Allied. The Walk I didn't much care for either. He's not really been on a lightning streak, but the music has been fairly consistent. But I would say that this is probably Silvestri's sort of warmest and more lyrical score that he's done for Zemeckis over the last few films.
Yeah, warm is the word. There's a lovely sense of very tender melancholy, and Silvestri can do that stuff very well. You think of something like Castaway or again Forrest Gump. We should say that it actually capped off what was an astonishing year for Alan Silvestri, because he also did Ready Player One for Steven Spielberg, and then he did Avengers Infinity War, and then of course he's back in 2019 with Avengers Endgame. So he's really on a roll at the moment, and I think those three scores are all very different from each other. They all strike very different tones. Like Ready Player One is about nostalgia and about Silvestri riffing on his own musical heritage. Infinity War paints this very bleak musical picture for the Avengers, and Welcome to Marwen is completely different. It's much more, in spite of the militaristic aspect, it's much more scaled back, and it's the musical depiction of one man struggling to put his life back together, and the sort of sadness and often joy that entails. I think he's a really, really great composer. He is very chameleonic, and what that means is, being chameleonic, sometimes the quality of what he does can vary quite wildly. But yeah, he holds a very special place in my heart, as I know he does in yours.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm looking forward to Avengers Endgame. We will get to that, I'm sure, on this podcast in a few months. But yeah, it could be another bit of a winner for year for Silvestri. So that's Welcome to Marwen, which is out now from Backlot Music. But anyway, let's move on, because we're going to do, over the next 2 episodes, we're going to be looking back at our 2018 scores. Anyone who listened to us before, or who follows us on social media and things like that, knows that we're interested in film music, and will have, seen some of our previous lists before in terms of scores for the year. But obviously last year we didn't have a podcast and operating, and we couldn't really talk much about 2018 scores. So we're going to pick through the previous year and see where we end up. So we're going to start with scores 10 down to 8. So, Sean, why don't you kick us off with your number 10 score of 2018?
Number 10 score from 2018, I've gone for Frank Ilfman and Ghost Stories, which was the Andy Nyman, Jeremy Dyson stage adaptation, really ghoulishly entertaining stage adaptation starring Nyman himself and then Martin Freeman, Paul Whitehouse and Alex Lawther. I love this film. It kind of slipped under the radar of a lot of people, but it's a throwback to classic 70s British anthology movies. It's got a lovely, bleak, wintry atmosphere, lots of jumpy, scary moments, also a lot of black comedy in it as well. And Frank Ilfman's score threads together a lot of very gothic, quite melancholy themes. It's a very orchestrally rich horror score and very inventive as well. I interviewed him about it, and he talked about how at one stage he used lots of children's toys and processed them and turned them inside out, and there's also use of choir as well. And I think it's very, very important in the in establishing the atmosphere of the movie. If you haven't heard it, Ghost Stories by Frank Ilfman, really impressive gothic horror score. Particularly
a track, for me, the final track. Good. I think it's called Goodman's Suite or something like that. It's the end credits track of Ghost Stories, which I thought was beautiful. It made my top 10 tracks, actual score tracks of the year. But it is a good film, and it does have some really great music. And I wasn't familiar with Frank Ilfman at all, so he's definitely one to watch out for, I think. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he scored low budget horror films before, but hopefully this one will elevate his profile. My number 10 then is maybe a little bit more of a well-known composer, James Newton Howard's score for Red Sparrow, which was the Jennifer Lawrence starring spy, not really thriller, more drama really, from last year. It's quite a long movie, Red Sparrow, and I'll be honest, I didn't love the film particularly. I thought it was quite languorous and dragged, and I didn't really buy the whole thing. But the score I thought was really good. I think Howard for me sometimes can be a little bit hit and miss, because he does a lot of stuff, James Newton Howard, and occasionally you'll get one that sometimes to me feels a little bit like it's just going through the motions, something like The Huntsman's Winter War, which I didn't particularly love. But then he'll come up with a Red Sparrow and he'll really tap into that sort of semi Russian Gothic sort of ballerina kind of vibe to it. And I really liked that sort of mix of that traditional sort of Russian style with the introduction of that sort of narrative spy mystery. And I think particularly the overture at the beginning is fantastic. So I think it's a really good James Newton Howard score. I'd put it up there with one of his best of recent years. Yeah, like Alan Silvestri, he's another person who's very chameleonic, and again, you never quite know what you're going to get with him, like you've just said. And I think there were bits of the Red Sparrow score that were really good. I loved the opening, like you said, the opening overture was really striking. I thought the rest of it kind of settled down for me into being a fairly generic thriller score, which would, again, like you said, wasn't helped by the fact that the film wasn't great either. The film wasn't particularly inspired, in spite of being quite luridly violent in a lot of places, unpleasantly so, I thought. But I think it's his latest collaboration with Francis Lawrence, with whom Newton Howard made The Hunger Games, and I think those scores get better the more I listen to them, actually. But yeah, Newton Howard again can be a tricky one to nail down. I mean, he had a fantastic year last year. Obviously, he did The Nutcracker and The Four Realms, and then obviously Fantastic Beasts: The Crimes of Grindelwald. So yeah, another fine composer nonetheless. Your number 9 then, Sean. What have you gone for? I've gone for The Ballad of Buster Scruggs by Carter Burwell. So talking about enduring composer-director partnerships, they don't come more so than the relationship between these guys. Goes way back to the 80s with the likes of Raising Arizona. And again, if you think that
the nature of the partnership between Alan Silvestri and Robert Zemeckis encompass lots of different styles. Obviously, the sheer idiosyncrasy of the Coen brothers' back catalogue means that Carter Burwell scores are all over the place in terms of the various tones that they strike and the stories that they tell. I've gone for this one because I think it's one of the most beautiful scores that Carter Burwell has done for the Coens. This reminded me a lot of the lyricism and the sadness and the poignancy of Fargo, which I think is one of the best things that he's done for them. And obviously this is a Western anthology story. It was originally going to be packaged as a Netflix TV series, was then reworked as a Netflix film, and clearly there is an episodic nature to the movie, which means there's an episodic nature to the music, and the music covers lots of different styles. I particularly liked the beautiful lyricism of the Tom Waits sort of gold prospecting sequence. I mean, that's one of the most beautifully scored scenes of the year. But then you also get lots of overtones of gothic horror in there. You get the sense of tragedy from the Zoe Kazan story, which I think pretty much everyone agrees is the best part of the whole film. And Burwell's very, very good at foreshadowing a sense of doom and sadness. And again, I think that goes back to Fargo as well. Yeah, I think it's a really, really, really lovely score, and Burwell routinely gets overlooked, I think, with his collaboration. The Coens get obviously awards darlings, but Burwell very rarely factors into that, which is a shame because he's really important in giving soul to their vision and sort of making sure that it emotionally sticks with an audience. Yeah, I love this score. So my number 9 is The Ballad of Buster Scruggs by Carter Burwell.
Okay. I'm definitely sold. So cool. My number 9 is probably less of a celebrated movie. It's The Cloverfield Paradox by Bear McCreary. Now, this was, of course, the third Cloverfield movie after 10 Cloverfield Lane and the original Cloverfield, which was thrown onto Netflix in a after the Super Bowl, in which they literally just went, surprise!
Yeah,
here's a film.
No surprise when you watch it. Yeah, it's like, I can see why it ended up there.
Yeah, I know. You were watching it thinking, oh my God, it's a really dodgy film. There's no great concepts, potentially really good ideas, some good actors, just dead on arrival, sadly. However, the score, and particularly sort of the opening sort of overture suite from Bear McCreary is great. Bear McCreary is consistently good in what he does. He did 10 Cloverfield Lane as well, which was a great score.
Yeah, that was a brilliant score. Yeah,
and he's consistently, he obviously I think we've talked about him in the original incarnation of this podcast. He was shot to fame through doing Battlestar Galactica, and he did some amazing work on that show on TV. And then he's done bits and bobs for The Walking Dead. He created the Walking Dead theme, which is a really good little blast of music. So and then he's done a lot of movie stuff. And the Cloverfield Paradox is a film that's destined to be ignored by millions. And that the sad thing is that his score, which is really sort of a traditional science fiction adventure, kind of rousing sort of mystery music. It's great. It really comes off. It's very listenable outside of the movie. I never intend to watch the film again, but I do intend to listen to the score a fair bit.
Yeah, but Bear McCreary's an interesting case because it's like he's becoming the monster composer du jour now, because he also scored that strange Anne Hathaway movie a couple of years ago, Colossal, which was basically Godzilla through the point of view of an alcoholic. It was a really interesting film. Yeah, and his score was very good because again, it's a story of a very damaged woman, and his score had an unexpected sense of intimacy to it. And I imagine that would strike a very, very different tone from his next project, which is going to be Godzilla 2, King of the Monsters. I believe he's scoring that, taking over from Alexandre Desplat, who did the first one. So yeah, it sounds like he's got the sort of monster genre pretty nailed at the moment.
That's very exciting. I didn't know that about Godzilla. That's very exciting, have to say, particularly off the back of this. So yeah, that's it. Ignore the film. Definitely look up Bear McCreary's score on Spotify or whatever, because it's great. All right, what's your number 8 then, Sean?
So I've got Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom by Michael Giacchino. I mean, it wouldn't be a 10 of the year list if you didn't have Michael Giacchino in it, because he is so prolific, and the quality of his stuff is normally so high. It's actually choosing which of his scores goes in is often the difficult bit. I went for Fallen Kingdom because I like the way it distinguishes its sonic palette from the first Jurassic World score, which I loved. I mean, that was very much about towing the line between Giacchino's own voice and that of John Williams, and I think he did it brilliantly in the Jurassic World score. I think he established a clutch of very, very good new themes that stood out from the original Jurassic Park movies. He's helped move the franchise into the modern day, but clearly with this one, the director J.A. Bayona strikes a slightly different tone, at least in the second half, by moving it more into gothic horror territory, because for those who've seen the film, the idea of the mutated Indoraptor creature gets out into the big mansion and chases the little girl around, chases our main characters around, Chris Pratt and Bryce Dallas Howard, and that allows Giacchino to really vary up the sound of the score and to move it more into gothic horror territory, albeit tongue-in-cheek gothic horror territory. I mean, it's done. Giacchino's got a real sense of awareness in his scores. I mean, that comes across in the track titles of his albums as well. They're always full of like jokes and puns. Yeah, I thought it was a really impressively powerful score. Actually, I like the way that he keeps on finding new ways of scoring these big blockbusters, because he does a lot of them. I mean, he is probably the 21st century blockbuster composer, and I think, you know, underestimate him at your peril. He always finds interesting ways of going about this. So yeah, I like the darkness of it. I like the creepiness of it. I like the way that it owes itself to Jurassic Park and also Jurassic World, while also changing things up just enough to keep everything interesting. Yeah, I thought it was a terrific score, really exciting to listen to.
It actually didn't quite make my top 10, surprisingly, because I think it was quite a strong year for scores, and I was trying to vary things up, but it would be absolutely number 11. I think it's really good. I think I described it at the time, and I haven't seen the film yet, but I've listened to the score quite a bit because it really works on its own. I described it as kind of like if he made an entire album off what he did at the end of the first Cloverfield, the raw end suite. It's basically a whole album of that. And that 10-minute suite at the end of Cloverfield is fantastic. So to have a whole movie score of that, and particularly kind of he repeats a lot of those same sort of bombastic refrains in the final 10-minute suite at the end of Fallen Kingdom as well, and the end of that very much reminded me of Raw, that dom 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 thing.
Well, it's almost it's interesting, isn't it? Because I mean, I'm assuming that Giacchino is going to come back and score the third Jurassic World movie, which is going to wrap up a lot of the plot threads that were left hanging in the air, and presumably that I won't give it away for those who haven't seen it, including yourself, but it looks like the story is going to reach increasingly grandiose and more ridiculous areas, which is always great area for a composer, because a composer can just go even more all out than they had done previously and can just completely throw caution to the wind, and Giacchino's great at doing that.
Is it dinosaurs in space?
Yeah, it ought to be. Just don't give them ideas for the next one. That's not what Hugh Grant thought Julia Roberts was doing in Notting Hill. That was a horse in space, wasn't it? Horse and hang.
My number 8, just to finish us off before we take a break and move back into the scores of this last month. My number 8 is Solo, a Star Wars story.
Fantastic
by John
choice.
Powell. Now, I'm pretty sure this is coming up on your list, isn't it?
I think it might be.
So we'll sort of pause it there, and we'll come back and revisit this when you cover it later. But suffice to say, fantastic score. Again, it's becoming a bit of a trend, really, of this top 10 list. Much better score than the film.
Yeah.
But same with Jurassic Park, same with Red Sparrow, Cloverfield Paradox. But we'll come back to this. Okay, so that scores 10 to 8. We'll be back in this episode a little bit later to talk scores down from 7 to 5. Okay, you've been listening to Can't Make Kentucky from Rob Simonsen, score to the Hugh Jackman starring political drama The Front Runner, which is all about the presidential campaign of Gary Ross. No, I hadn't heard of him either. In 1988, which was mired by sexual scandal. Now, I'll be honest, Sean. I've heard of Rob Simonsen. I've listened to one or two of his scores in the past, but I'm not going to lie, he's not a name that was heavily on my radar before this. But I genuinely think of all of the scores I've listened to this year, this right now is my favourite. Are you surprised by that?
Yeah, I am, because I think it wasn't a score that stood out to me necessarily in the film. Incidentally, I should say Gary Hart. It's about Gary Hart, the presidential campaign.
Gary Ross is a director, isn't he? What did he direct?
I believe Gary Ross did the Hunger Games, didn't he? Or the first Hunger Games, and he also did Pleasantville. Weirdly, those are two films you wouldn't put together usually.
I apologise, everyone. Gary Hart, not Gary Ross,
played by the great Hugh Jackman.
Please don't sue us, Gary Ross, for suggesting you ran for president and were mired in scandal.
Well, no, this is an interesting case, because I saw this film, The Front Runner, at the London Film Festival last year, and I can't say it made an impression on me. I thought it was quite weak. It's directed by Jason Reitman, and I think the movie makes the mistake of going soft on its central subject, and I think it sets itself up as a very quite bitter, quite nicely cynical look at how venal politics is, and it completely, to quote Eddie Izzard, collapses like a flan in the cupboard at the end. It doesn't resolve the stuff that it's meant to resolve, and I can't say the score stood out in the film. That, I mean, it's a very dialogue heavy movie, and I think the score is very much in a supportive role. But it's interesting listening to the score away from the movie. It's more interesting. I mean, there's a lot of elements of it. Sounds vaguely jazzy at some points there. The opening track has got some interesting percussive work in it, which gets the sort of urgency of the Ross campaign. There's the stakeout sequence where Hart discovers he might be having an affair, and yeah, I think Rob Simonsen he's done a lot of indie movies, and I think a lot of his scores strike that kind of melancholy notes. I mean, he recently scored The Upside as well, the Bryan Cranston, Kevin Hart movie, and it can be quite difficult trying to locate often what is memorable about his scores. But I think this one, the Front Runner, works well outside the film, definitely. Yeah,
it's really surprised me, because I think I've not seen the film, and yeah, by all accounts, it hasn't done very well, and it's not necessarily great, but I think what hit me with this was that it really sort of tapped into a level of suspense for me. And it was a suspense where sometimes those kind of scores, and like you said, that kind of jazzy percussive nature don't always work outside of watching the movie. But I've listened to this numerous times now without seeing the film, and I feel like I understand what the score is trying to say. I feel like I understand what Simonsen's trying to get across. And I feel like he captures a sort of fast-paced political journalistic world embroiled in something that he's building really well. Maybe even better than the film does, I don't know. But I was surprised by how much I enjoyed listening to this, and I do enjoy listening to this. Yeah, I don't really know how further to explain it. I just it struck with me, and sometimes, and I've said before on the previous incarnation of this podcast, my yardstick is does a score work? Can you listen to a score even if you haven't seen the movie and enjoy it as a piece of music? And with this, I really do.
Yeah, that you don't get a better endorsement than that, because it's very difficult to write a bit of narrative-led film music that transcends the picture. So yeah, full credit to the composer for doing that.
Yeah, and it's very subjective. Obviously, it didn't potentially do for you what it did for me, but that's one of those. It's one of those things, really. That's why it is so subjective quite often. But I will be looking out for Simonsen's stuff again. Like you, I've listened to a couple of his things and it didn't really hit me. So this could have been a one-off, but we'll see. We'll see.
He did do a very fine score for a brilliant movie from a few years ago called The Way, Way Back, which is a terrific film with Steve Carell and Sam Rockwell and Toni Collette. And again, the score in that was quite subdued but impactful. I think that was probably one of his better ones. There was also that weird Dave Franco, Emma Roberts movie called Pulse, which he did, which has got a very pulsating electronic score. That's great as well. So he has done great stuff before.
I have seen that. That's the one where they go, there's a social media app and they just get embroiled on like,
that's the one. Yeah, that's got a great score to it, very energetic and very, very different from a lot of Simonsen's other stuff. So yeah, he has done great stuff in the past.
Oh, well, maybe I'll definitely need to revisit Pulse then as a score. But we'll keep our eyes open for Simonsen. But you can purchase the Front Runner score now on Sony Classical. So I would say it's definitely worth giving that a listen, really. All right, let's jump back into our top 10s then of 2018 and talk about our rankings from number 7 to number 5. I'll kick us off this time, and I'm going for this to some people, and it's been one of these films that sort of bridged either 2017 releases or 2018 releases, but I first saw it in 2018 and it sort of came out over here in 2018. I'm going for Johnny Greenwood's score to Phantom Thread, which, I mean, the film is fantastic anyway. Paul Thomas Anderson's film, Daniel Day-Lewis's possibly last performance, but you never know with him, do you? And these kind of actors. And about a tailor in the 1950s in the UK who gets embroiled in this obsessive love affair. And it's a very, very typically Paul Thomas Anderson film because it doesn't go where you expect it to go. And it's a fantastic piece of work. But the score is wonderful. I mean, it's this beautifully sort of operatic, lyrical, grand piece of music that has such sort of sadness in it as well, such melancholy, such beautiful sort of melancholy. Like there's a piece called The House of Woodcock, which is just like bathing in silk. Listening to that, it's just wonderful. So I'm a huge fan of this. What about you? Did this really hit you, Sean?
Yeah, it did. Yeah, I thought this was an absolutely sumptuously beautiful score. I'm really glad you picked out The House of Woodcock here as well, because I think that's probably my favourite from the soundtrack, and just reaffirms Johnny Greenwood's astonishing transformation, really, from Radiohead member to classical musician par excellence. Obviously, he's worked with the BBC Concert Orchestra a lot. He's now got a very long-standing collaboration with Paul Thomas Anderson, going back to There Will Be Blood, which I believe was discredited from the Oscars, wasn't it? Because the score utilised some pre-existing classical pieces that he'd already done, which was an idiotic decision on the part of the Academy there. But what do they know about music? They don't know anything. But no, I thought this was his finest score so far. I thought it was absolutely beautiful. It's got a lovely sense of very typically like English repressed romance to it, and I mean, given that this is based the film, which I kind of had my reservations about, is kind of Paul Thomas Anderson's take on the Rebecca story, isn't it? The idea of the ghostly figures like lurking in the background, influencing the life of the central character. But the score does have an appropriately haunted and haunting quality to it, and the maturity of the writing, particularly for the strings, really took my breath away. Actually, yeah, I think it's a beautiful score. Yeah,
it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous, and I think that Johnny Greenwood's he's got this collaboration with Paul Thomas Anderson that just works. The one that sort of I think gets a little bit left behind sometimes is The Master, but The Master as well has got some really nice bits and pieces on there. But and he also, Greenwood also did some good work on Lynn Ramsey's You Were Never Really Here as well this year, which it's a much different, more intense and sort of atonal, dissonant kind of work, but it's still really good in a very different way. So yeah, he's having a blinder of a year, really. So long may it continue. What's your number 7 then, Sean?
My number 7 is The Shape of Water by Alexandre Desplat. I'm aware that some people might class this as a 2017 score and movie, but should bear in mind that the movie was released in February 2018 in the UK, and therefore I'm including the score and the movie as 2018 releases. Obviously, this got Desplat the Oscar, deservedly so. It's a really, really beautiful score. His first collaboration with Guillermo del Toro, and he really, Desplat really taps into that sense of whimsy and romance that is at the heart of the story, the relationship between Sally Hawkins, Eliza, and the fish creature played by Doug Jones, and sort of envelops you in this nostalgic sense of old school romance, which is absolutely at the heart of the movie, because of course Sally Hawkins' character lives above a cinema. The movie itself is a love letter to the likes of Creature from the Black Lagoon, and that sense of nostalgia practically drips from the music. There's lovely use of accordion and strings and woodwinds, and you think of that opening shot coming through the submerged apartment at the beginning, in which the music is basically what carries you through that scene, and the visuals are astonishing, but the music is telling you a lot about the characters before you've even been introduced to them, which is what film scoring should do. It should anticipate as much as it should, make things explicit. I thought it was a gorgeous score. It's dark when it needs to be as well, reflecting Michael Shannon's villainous character. But for the most part, it's just very, very listenable and very lovely. It's got that lovely, crystalline, delicate quality that I love in Desplat's music. There's a lovely sense of intimacy with it.
All right, then. So my number 6 is The Death of Stalin by Christopher Willis, which is the for the Armando Iannucci satire from last year, set in Russia at the death of Stalin, basically in the 1950s. Very much in the style of In the Loop, which of course was a satirical look at the American politics and British politics and things like this. But this is taking American actors with American accents, putting them in all these classic sort of Russian political roles. People like Jeffrey Tambor and Jason Isaacs, and it's a really good little film. But the score I thought was fantastic. It's ostensibly a comedy, but Christopher Willis plays it like it's Tolstoy. It's just amazing. What he does is this really sort of, again, these really grand strings, tapping into a different kind of Russian flavour that James Newton Howard did for Red Sparrow. That was much more elegant and seductive, whereas this is proper militaristic Russian, big Kremlin houses and tsars and all this kind of thing. And it's really over the top for a film which plays the subject matter with such sort of irreverent satirical silliness. I think it's great, all round great.
Yeah, I have to be honest, I've not listened to the score for this film at all. I mean, I saw the film at the end of 2017, and I'm a big fan of Armando Iannucci. I had mixed feelings on the film itself, which is a surprise because I think In the Loop is a masterpiece. I think The Thick of It is one of the greatest TV shows of all time. And I thought the film, although it was funny and although it had one of the most astonishing casts of that year, I mean everyone was so well picked, it felt a bit too broad for me. I think it was weird how broad it was played, and I kind of feel that a lot of the time the film went for the easy jokes, whereas I was expecting maybe something a bit more subtle. But I have to say I've not listened to the score by Willis at all. I don't really remember it in the film. Again, I think because a lot of the time it's such a dialogue heavy movie, and you're following the cadence and the rhythms of the dialogue to the extent I didn't really notice the score necessarily. But I'll have to go and check it out for sure. It's an interesting choice.
Yeah, it really, I was surprised that it made my top 10, but after I watched the movie, which wasn't too long ago, and I do agree with you, I enjoyed the film a lot, but it's no In the Loop. It's not that good. But the score just really blew me away. I was like, this is great. When you listen to it on its own as well, it's really, really good. So I really encourage you to do that. So I really dug that one. What's your number 6 choice then, Sean?
Well, it's something we've already covered just now, which is Phantom Thread. So I've just put it just slightly above where you're. I mean, at the risk of going through what we've just said, I thought it was a lovely, sumptuous, layered romantic score, and arguably Johnny Greenwood's finest compositional work so far, and it fits the movie like a glove.
Great choice. Okay, my number 5. Now, I found this really difficult to keep out of my top 3, to be honest, because I love this was my favourite film of last year. I love it to bits. I love the music to bits, but I could not, in all good conscience, put the score, much as it's wonderful, above the 4 I have. So my number 5 is Mark Shaman's Mary Poppins Returns. I mean, the songs are a different, kettle of fish. I know you're going to talk about this, I think, later, aren't you? I think.
Yes.
So I won't go into a lot of depth, but the songs are like fantastic. But and so is the score. The score around it is beautiful. But I couldn't put this higher than 5 because of the fact that there are 4 other scores that I thought were amazing this year. So here it sits. It deserves to be up there as one of the best, though, because it's wonderful.
It is wonderful, yeah, and the film was wonderful as well. But yeah, I'll go. Yeah, maybe go into it.
Yeah, we'll come back to that next episode.
Yeah,
we'll get back to Poppins. What's your number 5 then, Sean? As we close out our list for this episode.
So we've got Ready Player One by Alan Silvestri. I mentioned this earlier when we were talking about Welcome to Marwen. I mean, what an inspired choice of composer to write the music for a film that riffs on 80s pop culture, including a certain Back to the Future. Why wouldn't you get the composer of Back to the Future to riff on his own musical legacy? Clearly that all comes from the Ernest Cline source novel on which the movie is based. I mean, it's interesting. Silvestri does have an association with Spielberg because Spielberg produced Back to the Future, and there is the story that Spielberg wasn't necessarily that keen about getting Silvestri to do Back to the Future because he'd heard the score for Romancing the Stone and didn't like it and thought, no, we don't want that sort of very electronic synthesized tone for Back to the Future. It needs to be grandiose, orchestral, exciting. And Silvestri really had to prove himself on Back to the Future, and he did. And clearly Spielberg has remembered that because years later Silvestri has come back to do Ready Player One, which is virtual reality adventure that stuffs, like myriad pop culture references into every frame. It's a bit of a shallow movie going experience, albeit a fun one. I enjoyed it. Even if you do end up playing like spot the reference more than you do actually sort of following the narrative. But I love it's a quintessential Alan Silvestri score, which is that because of the film's frames of reference, it allows Silvestri to be as nostalgic and as old-fashioned as possible and to ground everything in one of those classic sweeping themes that he gave, Back to the Future and Who Framed Roger Rabbit and so on. And it's really, really great. And there are lots of like musical Easter eggs kind of dotted throughout as one would expect. And the use of the Back to the Future theme is done. It's ladled on just enough without becoming annoying. But really, the reason for me why it worked is because the score hits exactly the right sort of tone for the movie, and I think Silvestri was exactly the right choice to do the music for this.
Yeah, I agree, and it didn't make my top 10, but I really enjoyed the film. The film gets ragged on way too much for me. Yeah, I mean, I love the book anyway. I'm a massive fan of the book, so I was really excited for the film. Really enjoyed the film. Yeah, and it's a good score. It's a very good score. I liked this. I'll be honest, I liked this more than I did Infinity War. What he did with Infinity War. So yeah, great choice. Really good choice. It's nice to see it in one of our top 10s. So that's really good. So we'll be back with scores 4 to 1 in the next episode of Between the Notes. So keep an eye out for our top 2018 scores then. Okay, so that was the opening track from Glass, the score by West Dylan Thordson to M. Night Shyamalan's much-anticipated sequel to both Unbreakable and indeed Split from last year. So, Sean, I don't know about you. I think James Newton Howard's original score for Unbreakable, which was way back in 2000, is something quite special, to be honest. I think that score is just beautiful. Does Thordson, who is a very different sort of composer to Howard, really manage to capture or match that score here?
Well, I don't think he matches it, because I think I completely agree with you. I think Howard's score for Unbreakable is really formidable, and the music for Unbreakable is what makes that film such a moody, engrossing experience. The music kind of confounds you as to like what's actually going on. Does Bruce Willis have superpowers? Does he not? Is this real, or is this some kind of alternate version of reality? And it plays into the whole themes of comic books and powers and so on. But I think what West Dylan Thordson, who's not a composer I'm familiar with at all, does in this is he anchors the tone of this particular score for Glass to the score for Unbreakable, because you hear a lot of James Newton Howard's musical themes from Unbreakable, very moody, sort of sinuous themes coming out in this particular score, which makes perfect dramatic sense, because this is the continuation of the Unbreakable story that we didn't know we were going to get until that surprise reveal at the end of Split, when we see Bruce Willis in the diner and we think, there you go, that's very clever. And I remember thinking at the end of Split, oh wow, is Shyamalan now going to reunite with Newton Howard, because Newton Howard of course didn't do Split, but then for whatever reason that didn't happen. I imagine that's budgetary. I don't actually know the reason why Newton Howard and Shyamalan haven't collaborated together again. It might be budgetary. I don't know whether there are any like creative tensions going on behind the scenes. I mean, it probably didn't help that Newton Howard has scored some pretty dreadful Shyamalan movies over the last few years. He might have thought, what on earth am I doing scoring all this drivel? And somewhat ironically, when Shyamalan gets a measure of credibility back, his relationship with the composer seems to stop, which is a bit weird. But no, I thought Thordson's score for Glass was surprisingly effective. Actually, I mean, it's never going to match what Newton Howard was going to do, but I like the loyalty to the tone and the themes of Unbreakable. I think that needed to happen. You need to hear those themes flourish as the sort of latent story potential of Unbreakable takes shape. Yeah, I thought it was an impressive score. But Thordson himself, do you know much about him? Because I don't really. Well,
I know he did Split, and I think that might be the only thing. That's the only thing I can find on Spotify that's him. Yeah, basically. In terms, so that might be his first score. I don't really know much about the guy. No, he's fairly new on the block, I think. And I mean, the score to Split didn't resonate at all. Really, the film was pretty good. I quite liked the film, but the score didn't really stay with me at all. So I did have high hopes for this one. I won't lie, I was hoping that Howard was going to come back for Glass, but when he didn't, it was a case of, okay, well, can we get some of this Unbreakable stuff in there? And he does, like you say, he does weave that in. He does allow that to be there. And again, I haven't seen Glass yet, but I imagine he's weaving that in for the character of David Dunn, played by Bruce Willis, because it was a beautiful theme. And I'm glad that's in there. I did enjoy it. It was a bit jagged in places. It was a bit all over the place. He's pulling at different sort of strings. But that's probably the point, because in Glass you've got three very, very different kind of characters, and you've got one character, the James McAvoy character, who's got about 10 multiple personalities. So you've got all these different potentially ideas going on, and so it didn't necessarily flow all the time. But then I think maybe it's one of those scores that I think when you watch the film, I think it may work very well in that context. So yeah, it wasn't bad. It was not maybe as great as I would have wanted, but I did. It was an enjoyable listen on its own, and I look forward to watching it with the film, really.
Yeah, and there are moments where the Unbreakable theme, like for the Orange Man, that flourishes, as in Glass, as Samuel L. Jackson's Elijah Price's plans starts to take shape. You get more of that sort of grandiose sense of evil and tension, which is very well done by Thordson. actually. So I mean, it would have been very easy for them to have just cast that all out and to have gone, okay, Unbreakable's where it started, but now we're establishing a completely new musical palette with new ideas. They haven't done that. They have stayed loyal to it, and I admire them for that. I think that was the right decision.
Yeah, I agree. So yeah, you can buy Glass now again at Backlot Music, the original score for that, and we'll. I'm looking forward to seeing Glass eventually because I've heard mixed things, but I'm excited to see it. All right, so before we go, is there anything else, Sean, from January, from the month of January, that you'd like to touch on and recommend? I've got one piece, one score that we haven't covered fully on here yet, but is there anything that leapt out at you over the month of January that you'd like to mention that people should check out?
Well, I was going to talk about a bit of news. I mean, given that we're in award season, I just wanted to bring up the fact that the Oscars made history this. Actually, funnily enough, given that I slightly disparaged the Oscars earlier, the Oscars have actually done themselves a favour this year by recognising the Black Panther score by Ludwig Göransson for an Oscar, and that means it's the first comic book score to be nominated for an Oscar since John Williams' Superman back in 1978, which is quite phenomenal, really.
Yeah, it's amazing.
That is historic. So what I would say is, although that's a 2018 score and movie, I'd say anyone remotely curious about the nature of the music in that film, go and check that out again, because it's brilliant. The way it fuses Western symphony with Senegalese instrumentation and the vocals of Baba Maal, and with some trap hip hop beats. It's a fantastic score. I'm so delighted that it's got Oscar nominated. I think it's almost certainly the most versatile and creative Marvel Cinematic Universe score so far.
I will be touching on Black Panther next time in the top 10 scores of 2018, definitely, because it's a phenomenal piece. The score I was going to really recommend. Well, I suppose there's two. The first one I would say Mary Queen of Scots by Max Richter, which is from January, which is a really good piece of work. I think it really captures that regal, royal, sweeping melody of it all really well. But the one that I really liked, the other one that was probably after the front runner, the one I enjoyed the most, and probably has the biggest in terms of longevity and in terms of being really sort of a beautiful piece of work, I would say Colette, the score to Colette by Thomas, I don't know how you say his surname. Here we go again. Aides or Aids or one of these. You might know, Sean. I don't know.
Is it Thomas Ade? Maybe, yeah.
Probably. Who knows? It's a running theme with me that I get it wrong. Yeah. But that the Keira Knightley film set, I think, in the 1800s, which is it's a beautiful piece of work. That score, it's just gorgeous. It reminded me of Dario Marianelli's Anna Karenina, which also starred Keira Knightley in many ways. It has, again, such a sweeping majesty to it. Beautiful melody. I'd encourage anyone to go and listen to that. It's really, really great to listen to outside of the film, which again I haven't seen. That'll be another common thread. I haven't seen the films of the music we're talking about because I'm so far behind with everything. But yeah, so I'd recommend go away and look up those two as well, because those two are really good from January. Okay, so we're going to be back very soon for the second episode of Between the Notes, where we're talking about more music more in February of this year. So we're back a little bit more in contemporary mode, and all our goodbye details will be in our brand spanking new credits. Because we're doing it properly this time.
Yeah.
So we won't go through all that, but we just want to thank everyone for listening back to our first episode back. Hope you've enjoyed it. And I hope you've enjoyed it, Sean.
I have. Yeah, it's been great being back. Yeah, I really enjoyed doing this.
Yeah, it's great. So we'll be back very soon for another episode of Between the Notes. But until we're going to play you out with the end credits from Alan Silvestri's Welcome to Marwen. So sit back, enjoy, and we'll see you next time on Between the Notes. Between the Notes is produced and edited by Tony Black, who hosts alongside Sean Wilson. You can find Tony on Twitter at AJBlackWriter and Sean on Twitter at Seano22. You can find Between the Notes on Twitter at BTW_notes, on iTunes, your podcast app of choice, on Spotify, Stitcher and on Spreaker, where the show is part of the We Made This podcast network. For more podcasts all about TV, film, books, music and popular culture in general, you can find We Made This on Facebook and on Twitter at We Made This Pod. Thanks for listening.